to me is
It looks perfect over here.
okay. So we can start.
Yeah, we can start. So as people are coming in, I will get kind of all of the boring housekeeping stuff out of the way, the stuff no one is here for.
Right.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight, and thank you to Lisa and Michelle for joining us. If you are unfamiliar, we are Belmont Books, an independent bookstore in the greater Boston area. We're about to celebrate our 5th anniversary next month, so we're so excited. If you haven't been to one of our virtual events before, it's pretty easy. I'll do some housekeeping stuff, introduce Lisa and Michelle, and then hand it over. They will chit chat for about 40-45 minutes, and you're welcome to ask questions in the chat or Q&A function, which Michelle will get to at about 6:45 Eastern time, so quarter of the top of the hour. So we definitely encourage engagement and chat and questions. So if you have them, feel free to pop them in at any time. We have some other events this week. We have another virtual event on Thursday with Connie Hertzberg Mayo and Lynn Reeves Griffin, talking about Connie's new historical fiction, The Sharp Edge of Mercy. And then we're slowly integrating in-store events again. So we have one on Friday, the 20th at 5:30. It is a middle grade event. The two authors, Elaine Demopoulos and Diana Wren, will be talking about their eco-activism middle grade mystery novels. So that'll be really fun, but it'll be 5:30 at Belmont Books. If you're unfamiliar with us, we are open for browsing, so you're welcome to stop in. But if you're not local, we do offer shipping throughout the US. So we definitely encourage you to shop local, shop at us or a local independent bookstore. Keep those independent bookstores going. I know we have plenty of copies of Lisa's book on the shelf. And now I'm going to introduce both Lisa and Michelle. So Lisa Bird Wilson is a Cree Métis writer and poet and the CEO of the Gabriel Dumont Institute of Native Studies, an organization committed to the renewal and development of Métis culture and education. Probably Ruby is her debut novel and her American debut. She lives in Saskatoon, Canada. Michelle Good is a Cree writer and member of the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. After working for Indigenous organizations for 25 years, she obtained a law degree and advocated for residential school survivors for over 14 years. Good earned a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of British Columbia while still practicing law and managing her own law firm. Her poems, short stories, and essays have been published in magazines and anthologies across Canada, and her poetry was included on 2 lists of the best Canadian poetry in 2016 and 2017. Five Little Indians, her first novel, won the HarperCollins UBC Best New Fiction Prize. And before the event, Lisa and Michelle were talking about awards and nominations. So hopefully they will share some of that and have some awards to add to their bios in the next few months. So Michelle, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So nice to be able to participate in this with you, Lisa. I read your book and I was just so incredibly impressed with it that I was quite happy to have this opportunity to sit down and chat with you about it. So let's get those award things off the plate right off the bat. So I understand that you're nominated for the Amazon First Novel Award. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, and thanks for that, and thanks for asking. And I'm so excited to be here with you. And it's really weird. We're both from Saskatchewan, and we're not that far apart, and yet we haven't met. So this is our first time. So I'm really excited for that. And thanks so much for, participating and being a part of sort of my launching my book and getting it out there. So yeah, the Amazon First Novel Award is at the end, June 1st. It's June 1st, and I get to go to Toronto for it. So it'll be my first, I think that's my first time on a plane in 2.5 years or whatever. Like it's just been so long being able to go anywhere. So I'm really excited to, I bought new clothes. Like I have an outfit.
Yeah.
I have shoes with a heel, and I'm gonna have to learn how to walk in them again.
All the challenges we face.
Yeah.
writing and publishing was not sufficient challenge. There's the whole clothing issue and heat and all that.
I have to get out of my sweatpants for the first time in 2 years, right?
Or my pajamas. I zoomed many events in pajama pants and a nice blouse, right? So anyway,
Exactly.
so yeah, I won the Amazon First Novel Award last year, and it's such a boost. It's so great, and I would be just in heaven, if 2 Indigenous writers in a row won that award. That would just be fabulous. And your book is worth it. Totally
Oh,
worth it. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
very
it was
deserving.
lovely.
So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about maybe the genesis of the book and the idea, where it came from, and when and how you made the decision to proceed with this work.
Yeah, well, I was coming out of publishing my poetry book in about 2016. And all along, like when I was about, I don't know, probably 3/4 of the way done that poetry book, it was going to be there. It was going to be there. And I kept saying, I really want to write fiction again, because you're so tired of the thing you're working on. You just want it to be over. So I kept saying fiction. I want to do fiction again. And then the book was out, the book was published, away we go. And I sat down to write fiction, and I had a really hard time getting into it. It was like, what am I going to write about? Oh, I just have no idea. And I'm out of ideas. I guess I can't write any more fiction. Like I was really,
It's over.
yeah, it's like I didn't know what I was going to do. Anyway, so then I just started with, okay, well, the whole thing is write what you know. So let's start writing about being Indigenous, being adopted, what that experience is like. But then, trying to be really curious about like other sides of that story, right? So what's that like for, other people in a family who there's somebody who's been like a child or a grandchild, or somebody who's been dislocated from the family. And so I just was trying to write all these different ideas about that, and I thought I was writing a short story collection. And then so I got this massive stuff together, and I put it all together as one, and then I sat down and I read through it all. And I thought, this is like a really terrible short story collection, because all the female characters sound like the same person. So then I was like, oh, yeah. So I mean, that turned out to be Ruby, right? And then I really had to dig deep to figure out who is Ruby, and what's Ruby all about, and what's driving her, and what's her, and so it took a long process to kind of work my way up to the character of Ruby, and this is a novel, and this is Ruby's story. But when I got Ruby, when I kind of just really got her character and figured out who she was, then I really liked Ruby and I really was excited to write about her. So I got energy, from that character and from liking that character as well. And so that, keeps you going and keeps you doing what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Oh, it does. Once you start developing relationships with your characters, right? It's like, then it's almost as though, and I felt this way when I was writing Five Little Indians, right? Was that it's almost like they're telling me the story and I'm writing it down, that I'm more the scribe and they're the ones that are carrying the story. And it's magical when it's like that. I mean, we all know the times when we're struggling along to make it work, right? But yeah, I can certainly relate to that. And it's interesting too that you thought you were writing short stories, because when I first started with Five Little Indians, I thought I was going to be writing a collection of short stories as well. And I think, and you tell me what you think, that's for first-time novelists, it's kind of a confidence thing. We feel comfortable that we could write a story, but are we confident enough that we could pull off a novel, right? And it was pretty early on that I decided this is a novel, but I think it's a confidence thing. Do you think that? Do you agree?
That's probably true. When I think about writing short stories, I think I have no problem jumping into a short story anytime, any day, anywhere, because your commitment on it is not huge, right? Like you might finish this story in 2 months, and if it's not working, then you just put it aside.
Yeah.
But if you start out thinking you're writing a novel, like,
80,000 words, right?
you could put 2 years into that.
Yeah.
And that is pretty scary. Like what if you put 2 years in and then you realize it's not working? I mean, that's just part of the process. You gotta work the hard parts to get to that magic that you were talking about, where you love your content or your characters or your whatever the thing is about it that's really working for you. So
Yeah.
as much as I really want to jump to that part, I know that there's the hard part as well at the start, and there's a hard part all the way throughout, and there's a hard part at the end, because editing is like just sucks at some point. It's so hard. It's so much editing. Like you're gonna just edit so much more.
Well, I had a prof in the MFA program who said that the real work is in revision.
Mhm.
That's true. You get the heart of the story down, you get your characters in place, and you get the arc, the so on, right? You get that in place. But the real writing, the real work is making it work in revision. It's definitely challenging, that's for sure. So tell me about Probably Ruby. Tell me about the title. Where did that come and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, the title was hard to come up with. Like it took a lot. I have a list in my phone in the notes of like all these terrible titles, like really, really long. Like there's probably like 30 or 40 of them. There's a lot. And they're really bad. And so, I would go for drinks with my friends and we'd just make up all these really dumb titles, because I think you just have to do that, right? Like you just have to brainstorm.
Yeah.
But the idea of Probably Ruby is really coming out of Ruby's identity crisis about who she is, right? She's been adopted into this white family. She's an Indigenous kid. She is trying to figure out herself forever and where she's come from. And I always say she spends her whole life trying to find her way home. And so at some point in the book, she even finds like another name, a name that she had when she was born. And she just totally just doesn't even associate with that name. Like she can't connect with it at all. But she's not even sure if she connects with the name that she does have, because she finds it a little bit ridiculous too, the way that her adopted parents named her. So she's just got this insecurity about herself and her identity and who she is. So the idea of that she's probably Ruby, it's still that very tenuous, who am I kind of thing at the end of the day. And I don't think Ruby has a really strong what do you call it?
Sense of self?
Yeah, well, she doesn't have that, although she sort of does, because she's like got that big laugh and that big personality, and she's gonna show everybody who she is.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a defense mechanism for her. But I don't know that she resolves it. Do you know what I mean? Like Ruby doesn't come in a neat package at the end of everything. Ruby doesn't sort of just meet her birth family and all as well.
Yeah, well, and that was one thing I really liked about it, is that it didn't end in a really neat little package, because that's the reality, in the Indigenous world, for these children that were scooped and placed in, non-Indigenous adoptive families, probably the vast majority of them never find their way home. And, and that sort of that big hole in their heart, if they will, is something that they live with forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really liked that. That was the feeling that I got. Yeah, probably, but who knows, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. I went through the same thing with my title, although I had a working title for, well, you may have heard it took me 9 years to write this book, right?
Mm.
And had 2 working titles through the writing process, but then me and a friend of mine just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, again, about 5,000 titles, right? And until this one just sort of landed on my shoulders one day. But it is, choosing a title is kind of critical, right? It's the thing that's right there on the cover that's going to draw or not draw. And so I thought that was quite an ingenious approach. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, why is it important to write about these stories, about these subjects? Yeah, I'll follow that up with something else.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I've got your book. I'm very excited about it. I'm halfway through and I keep running out of like space to read, but it's of course it's wonderful. It's won so many awards, and rightly so. And I think that when, I'm getting off topic here, but when books win awards like that, it's tremendous, because it's flagging it to readers that, books don't win awards for no reason. So it's flagging it for readers that, yes, pick this book up. This is important. Okay, what was your question again? Sorry.
It was, oh dear, better have another coffee here. No, it was, why is it important for us as Indigenous people to tell these stories? Like my stories about the Red School, your stories about really this part of the scoop, right? Yeah.
And so, okay, so for people who maybe are participating or will participate in this and don't know, so the idea of the term the 60s scoop, which it's kind of a shorthand thing that I'm not sure I'm always comfortable with, but it's kind of the idea of covering from about 1951 to 1991. So it's covering this period of time when it's like the government sort of switched its approach. So we had residential schools going on for those 150 years, and that was the assimilationist, agenda, right? That colonial governments had to assimilate Indigenous kids, get them out of their culture, turn them into, not Indigenous kids, or whatever the objective was. And then the schools started to close down. And you hadn't had a lot of Indigenous kids in this child welfare system. And then all of a sudden there was this shift of, oh, let's take kids away from their parents because, poverty or whatever the reasons were, they turned it into something, whatever the real sort of issues were in families, whether there were issues or not, or whether it was just cultural bias and all of that. But rather than support families, to keep kids, it was, let's take these kids, let's put them in white families, let's isolate them in these little middle-class enclaves so that they feel like they're the only one. And to strip away all of their culture and all of their connections to their language and their families and their homes. So it was more assimilation. So I really see that kind of that path, that trajectory, right? Residential schools, 60s scoop. Now we've got foster care and child welfare. Like we're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids like affected by this. And this is colonization, right? And so if you're an Indigenous person right now, today, alive in this world, that you can't be an Indigenous person and not have that history and that background and be connected to that in some way, even if you don't really know it. Like even for Ruby,
nobody came through unscathed.
Exactly.
If it wasn't you, it was your brother or your cousin or your uncle or your auntie or someone.
Yeah, right? Or your parents or your grandparents or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, this Ruby, this character Ruby, is this contemporary, right now, human embodiment of what it means to be Indigenous. And she's got all of this history behind her that you see through the other people who are in the book, who are part of her story and part of her history. But as a reader, you end up knowing those things about Ruby, and Ruby doesn't even necessarily know those things about herself. Like she doesn't know that these are her relatives, all of them, and that's their story.
Yeah, that's really great. I used to think that it was about assimilation, and not very long ago, I changed my mind about that. And I decided that it really was about genocide.
Mhm.
And the reason that I came to that, and I came to that while I was writing my book, was because if it had been intended for assimilation, right, where was the support? Where
Mhm.
was the education? When the kids left the res schools, where was their support? It was just non-existent, right? And it's really interesting. I'm sure you're aware that the residential schools were based on the Indian boarding schools in the US.
Mm.
And the guy that was a key person in developing those said something once that just blew me away when I found it in my research. And he said, this arrangement of having the churches administer the schools and administer this is an excellent approach to deconstructing Indian children.
Mhm. Wow.
Okay. Yeah, right. And that's the same thing. That is the same intent, the same focus, in my view anyway, of the foster system, the child welfare system, and so on. And I think a lot of people don't know that the res schools started closing down in 1969. And a lot of people, I think it's because they thought, oh, well, this is not such a great thing. That's not the case. The reason was because the employees wanted to be fully recognized federal employees with benefits and vacation time and, all of this extra money for the government to pour out. And the government just didn't want to kick out the money. So they started winding down the schools. And as you say, there was that transition to the child welfare system. So, that objective of the ongoing assimilation, genocide, the termination of Indigenous people through the theft of their children continued, just with different people at the reins, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, and um, I think that people don't really understand how weird it is to be an Indigenous person raised by a non-Indigenous family, and how these young children recognize their difference, but that difference is without substance because they're not in association with their community, with their culture. And so there's this great empty place in them as a result. And I think that your book is really important for that reason, is that it really brings it to the fore, if you will, that it wasn't just residential schools, and that very horrible objective continues even today through the
Mhm.
child welfare system. And I think your work and the work of other Indigenous writers is so important for bringing that forward. And you did it so well in this book. She was such a human being, I mean, she's got some questionable behaviors, right? But that's what makes her human, right? And I think that is the sign of um, of a really excellent character, well drawn, because they have depth. They're real. They have flaws. They have, they have, good points. They have everything, and that's what makes them human. And I really felt very connected to her because of that. I thought you developed a really excellent character in her. And so, yeah, so there's that. Um, so how long did it take you? I think I read somewhere, but I don't quite remember at the moment. How long did it take you once you got through?
I felt like I was ready. Geez, I'm gonna say 2019. So the
Yeah.
book was originally accepted by a small publisher and edited. I edited it first with Warren Carreau, who is wonderful. And then I was actually marking up the galley proofs, and the publisher went bankrupt.
Oh my goodness. Oh, no.
So it was fortunate the book hadn't actually been published, like, because I was able to regain my rights and take the book back. And then I managed to connect with an agent, and then things moved in a different direction. And so I ended up with a second life for this book and re-edited the book again with another editor.
Oh no.
Yeah, which was a good thing. It was a good thing. It was good for the book, and it was the right thing to do. So that process though took a really long time to kind of end up getting, actually published, through the route it's gone through now. I'm okay with that. Like, it takes a long time no matter what. And sometimes when you get in your book with a small publisher, you'll wait. Like, I think my first book, I waited maybe 2 years or something for the book to actually come out. So it was accepted. And then it was in a queue. Like, it was,
Yeah.
and they stagger it in certain ways and do whatever they do. But yeah, so I mean, that can just happen. But the editing, man, tears happen.
I was really fortunate. My editing experience was really smooth. It really
you're
was.
so
But
lucky.
that's because I did a manuscript evaluation. I had a writer friend of mine do a manuscript evaluation, and that she recommended that I cut the first 5 chapters, not to get rid of them, but to reintegrate that information into the book. And that took me a full year to do, right? And so when it actually got to the publisher, it was in pretty good shape. And so my editing experience was, I just went through it differently. We all have the tears and the fears, like, oh my God, I've completely messed this up. But yeah, so that part of it can be a real challenge. That's for sure. So are you working on something now?
I am. I have a contract with a publisher to do something memoir-ish. So I'm working toward that. I'm working on pieces.
Yeah.
It hasn't coalesced yet, but yeah, it will. It's a
It does.
process.
The muse is an independent beast, right? The muse shows up when the muse is good and ready to show up.
Yeah.
I could really relate to what you were saying too when you said that you were finished with poetry at that point and wanting to get into something different. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm writing a collection of essays now, and I'm saying, why did I do this? I really want to write this novel. But anyway, it's an interesting life, this writer's life, that's for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So memoir, I find, is a very, very powerful medium sometimes, that there is real opportunity for teaching and learning through that form, through that genre. So I hope that, well, I'm actually absolutely confident that you'll be successful with that, and it'll be really great for us, all of us readers, once we're able to put our hands on it. So, when I was writing my little book, I felt that I had a personal relationship with each one of those characters.
Mhm.
In lots of ways, they began to feel like my own children. Did you feel that with Ruby?
Oh yeah. To me, Ruby is still going. Like, she's still, out there doing her thing. And I mean, I sometimes think, oh, I should write more Ruby. And so I jot down some notes and do whatever, but we'll see.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Have you considered a sequel? I think that might be very interesting to see where Ruby goes from now, right?
Mhm.
Be a very
Yeah.
interesting subject. Yeah. Keep on with those notes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
great. Yeah, so tell me something that was the biggest struggle for you in writing this book.
I think that, somebody asked about, I think it's the First Novel Award, they asked about, like, why are first novels special?
Mhm.
And I said, because you dig so deep and you put it all into your book. And I think that for me was hard. Like, it was hard for me to be that I don't even know what the word is. It's not really vulnerable, but it kind of is like to have Ruby be that honest of a character, because, and I mean, I'm not saying that Ruby is me at all. I'm not saying that at all, but Ruby, you know, is adopted and Indigenous and Métis and Cree, and, you know, like there's all those similarities. And I had to get over, thinking that people, A, were going to think this is me, B, that they would, you know, read about this wild life that Ruby has and think anything about me, like even that I could make that up, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I had to stop, you know, your self-censor, you really
yeah,
do.
yeah, it's true.
So I think that was the hardest thing. And I really dug deep. Like I really, you know, put so much into this book that yeah, that was probably one of the hardest things to do, was to be that bold, or whatever it is, about Ruby and her story and the things that she goes through. Because even some of the things in there, I very much, in a lot of ways, think I was writing. So I was writing, I was pretty conscious of writing to other Indigenous adoptees in a way that they would recognize something, or that they would maybe see something that was part of their experience, but see it in a little bit of a different way. So I was very aware of doing that. And in doing so, you have to reveal your own fears and your own you know, soft spots
Yeah,
about
those tender little places. Yeah,
about what might have happened to you in your experience, or maybe didn't happen to you. Like there's a lot of parts in there that I'm exploring, you know, other people's, you know, things that they've expressed. But I think the most important thing for me, when I was much younger and I read somebody's story about being Indigenous, being adopted, and that sense of like loss and longing and just not knowing how to deal with that, I think that it made me understand that I wasn't alone. And that was maybe the first time that I understood that. And now I understand, like there's, you know, the official number is 20,060 Scoop kids. That's, that has to be a gross underestimation, because I can see 40,000 making
easily.
more sense, and 100,000 since the 1990s of kids who have been in care, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's just a massive number. So understanding that I'm not alone in this, that this isn't my story alone. This story is the story of tens of thousands of Indigenous kids. That's really important to me, because really, being adopted into that structure and that system, it's meant to isolate you, and it's meant to make you feel like you're alone and like you're the only one, even though Ruby in the book can see all these other kids around her. And, you know, she's like, bing, 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 her radar's going off. But she's supposed to imagine that, you know, she's the only one.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and that whole isolating thing, you know, is characteristic of the colonization process, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the whole divide and conquer in its many different apparitions, if you will, it's definitely there. And, you know, when you think about the 20,000, that's absurd. I mean, it's absurd. There's probably 20,000 60 Scoop kids that are dead, right? I mean, it's just, it's that whole thing is a bit of a farce as far as I'm concerned. But, you know, so speaking of farces, what did you think about the papal apology?
Oh, we're going to go
Not
there.
to tip my hand at all.
Yeah, I was very, so I heard the translation on the radio just right after it happened or whatever. And I mean, it was just so obvious, this deflection to, you know, it's no recognition of the systemic nature of what happened. It's just this evil individuals did these things, right? And So it was super disappointing to hear that. I was super surprised that there was an apology. So I didn't expect that at all.
Yeah.
But then, it's kind of it's very much not, yeah, it's not taking that responsibility
Yeah.
within that structure and that system and the way that things actually did happen. That wasn't there at all. So
Well, it really wasn't. And it's so, I mean, I'm thankful for that apology because I know that for some people it did give them peace and it was meaningful to them. And for that, I'm thankful. However, from my perspective, it's just weasel words, right? It's, oh, there were some bad people who were associated with the church and they did terrible things. But as you say, it doesn't acknowledge the responsibility of the church itself. And, in particular, the Catholic Church was deeply invested in destroying Indigenous people right from the time of Christopher Columbus, right? The Catholic Church needs to fess up once and for all, in my humble opinion. um, yeah, so I was thinking too about your comments about first novels and that question. I don't think their questions change. I got that question too last year.
yeah.
And I think that I totally agree with what you say about why those novels are important. But I think there's a couple of other things too. Is that they're like a preview. Like you go to the movie theaters. Many of us haven't for a couple of years, but you go to the movie theater and you see this incredibly brilliant, like exciting preview, and you think, "Oh God, I have to see that movie," right? And I feel that same way about debut novelists. Is that it is their preview, and it really gives such an indication of an emerging talent, and I think they're so important in that way, and they only happen once.
Mhm.
Your first novel only happens once. I think one of the other challenges, and you can tell me what you think about this, of being a first-time novelist, is that as we're writing away, we really have no idea if what we're doing is any good, right? Like you're writing away and you think, is this garbage? Right? I mean, is this like, over the top? Is this too emotional? Is this, like, and I think that is a real challenge of that first novel, and why emerging writers and first novels should be um, acknowledged, with awards, prizes, and so on, because you're investing all this time and energy and work into this, and you never know if it's even going to see the light of day. And if it does see the light of day, how it will be received. So I think first time novelists are extremely courageous in that sense. Yeah. And I really, I really appreciated your no holds barred approach to telling this story. Um, some truths are so hard to tell, like with her challenging behaviors and so on. I think sometimes, like, I know that when I was writing my characters, I thought, am I going to, when I was dealing with their vulnerabilities, right? Am I going to be giving people a terrible impression of Indigenous people by doing this, right? Am I doing this in a way that people can understand why these behaviors emerge? And maybe that's why it took me 9 years. I was just deeply insecure. But I think that's a huge challenge, is not only to be fearless in terms of writing the truth, right? But also to not get trapped into, the whole trauma porn thing, because we are so much more than our trauma.
Yeah.
And that was something that really impressed me about your work too, is that it isn't a trauma fest. There's lots of there's trauma, but that's not what the book is about, right? The book is about identity and the loss of identity, and and you do that very well. What do you think about that whole thing of trauma porn?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like I really didn't want this book to be that. And so I think that's part, like, it's so I don't know, it's like I don't know. I didn't want Ruby to be pathologized in any way. Like, she's vulnerable, but she's not a victim. And she has, she has figured out in her life how she's going to survive and how she's going to own it and how she's going to, what she's going to do and how she's going to do it. So I really did want to stay away from that. And I wanted there to be enough humor as well that you could, balance out the hard parts, because there are some hard there, that's there. But like I said, if you're an Indigenous person, that's there. Like, I mean,
That's life, right?
yeah.
And I think that's the balance that we look
Yeah.
for, is being true to that reality that we are a marginalized, brutalized segment of the population in this country, but we're much more than that. And, acknowledging the truth of it in the work while not letting it subsume the work, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know I didn't ask this before we got going today, but would you be willing to give us a short reading?
Okay, how much time do I have?
Oh, we got lots of time. We still got 20 minutes here. So
Okay.
you just choose what you would like to do.
I really like to read from the first chapter, because there's, you sort of get Ruby's personality there, and you get a little bit of humor and whatever else. So maybe if I could just do that.
Sure.
Let me just figure out where's the best place to start. Okay, so I'll just jump in here and then we'll figure out where to jump out.
Okay.
So
I'm just going to close my camera while you're
okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
I'll be back when you stop.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Okay, so Ruby is going to see she's at her counselor's home office, and that's the first time he's asked her to go there, and she has this big crush on her counselor. So we will just jump in there. Oh, and she's also jealous of his ex-wife, who she calls X. And so she's noticed the ex-wife has all of these, is a glass blower and has all these little glass ornaments all over the place. And there's one right beside her that she's been watching, that's this little round ball or whatever of glass. And she's jealous of course, because, she's got this crush on Cal. Okay, so if Cal had noticed she was always the first one to call time on their sessions, he hadn't let on. She spent her life being told she was chosen, but constantly needing people to prove it. With Cal, she didn't want to be confronted with the fact that this was a business relationship. She didn't want him pointing out that time was up and she had to leave. She'd rather leave of her own accord. It was like breaking up. She was always the first to call it over. As they were wrapping up, Cal asked her to fill in a questionnaire about how useful the session was and how close she felt to resolving her issue on a scale of 1 to 10. She didn't want to make Cal feel bad by giving him a low score, so she gave it an 8. But on instant reflection, she knew that was too optimistic. She definitely thought they'd made some progress, though. He invited her to his house after all. When he turned to his filing drawer to return her file, she did something she had no idea she would do. She palmed X's glass marble. As he was turning back to face her, she grabbed her bag as if she was looking for something, dropping the marble into her bag at the same time. She pulled out her bus pass and gave Cal an award-winning smile. When she left, he gave her a hug at the front door, a bit paternal, but still physical contact. She squeezed good and tight, but not sexy tight or needy tight, just I appreciate you tight. She decided to walk. Cal lived in the east end of the city and she was in the west. She walked down one of the city's busiest arteries, full of bars, restaurants, tire shops, love shops, you name it. The day had warmed up and she felt light on her feet. She considered whether she should text Cal to say thanks for today's session. She thought she probably would. She was feeling so good, she decided to stop at a familiar pub. It was only 4 p.m. and the place was nearly deserted. She took a seat at the bar. She ordered a pint of beer and enjoyed the first cold swallow, anticipating the spread of warmth that would let her shoulders relax and eventually fill her with curiosity and cuteness. She fished out her phone to text Cal now before she had too many drinks. 2 things she'd learned to be careful about. 1, she always lied to her counselors about drinking. Some of them had their own hang-ups about alcohol and drugs, and she didn't want any of them confusing their issues with hers. The second thing she'd learned was don't drunk text, drunk email, drunk Facebook, and so on. Best to get any follow-up text to Cal out of her system now, pre-drink. But before she had a chance to do that, she sensed someone occupy the bar stool next to hers. Next one's on me, said a familiar voice. She closed her eyes for just a second. Dana, oh my God, she said, as if she was not at all surprised. I was literally just talking about you. He looked confused. To my counselor, she said. Ha ha, all good things, I'm sure, he laughed, as if they were a couple of corny business buddies out for happy hour, as if he wasn't really bad news, as if she wasn't still in love with him. Actually, I was saying how when I first met you, I wondered if your beard would give me razor burn. But then afterwards, I realized I shouldn't have worried. She laughed her spectacular laugh so he could remember what he'd been missing. When the bartender came by, Dana ordered another round. The bartender plunked a new pint in front of Ruby. Dana said, "Big head on that one." "I don't mind a bit of head," she said, taking up her line like there had never been a break between them. "You want to get out of this place?" he asked. She diffused her laugh all over the bar. "It's going to take a lot more than 2 beers to get me out of here." Should I stop there?
Wherever you want.
I can. It gets more complicated after that.
Yeah, it does. But it was just really nice to hear that, because it was that passage right there that really hooked me into the book, right? You begin to see, so much of her character and how interesting she is, and, that kind of thing. That was really nice. Thanks for that.
No, thanks for asking me to read.
Yeah.
It's always fun.
Well, it's fun, and it also gives people a sense of, what's going to be between these covers, and that it's so worthwhile for reading, right? It was definitely one of my favorite reading experiences this past year.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Really enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
I like to read it out loud to people, because I think it helps them to hear how I hear Ruby and how I hear the book, because I think some people do kind of go into it, if they're super serious, they go into it with this real pathos kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's probably important for them to pull back from that a little bit and to be able to see the humorous parts of it in the ways that Ruby is funny, right?
Yes. Yeah, and she's really quite hilarious. And that was something about my book as well, is that it wasn't really an intent to have humor, but if you're writing Indigenous characters,
yeah,
it's there, right? Because it's such a huge part of who we are, right? And not only just naturally and in a good and relaxed way, but also a real coping mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. Making something funny, taking the power away, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Totally. I also really related to what you said about people assuming or wondering if you're Ruby, right? Mm-hmm. Because with my book, everybody was certain that I was Clara. And I said, no, it's creative writing. Creating characters, and we're not writing, well, and I mean, of course, ourselves are in them because they're coming from within us, right? But, but we're not telling our own story, really. Mm-hmm. That's what memoir will be, right? But I wonder why that is. Why do you think people want to make us our own characters?
Yeah, I find that really a lot with Ruby. Like, people say to me, "Oh, I was wondering, is Ruby Lisa?" And you know, and people actually sometimes when I've been in interviews, people have called me Ruby, which is funny. But yeah, she's such an intense, individual person and woman. And I can sort of see that people might take that away. And the fact that, we have these similarities, right? Like being adopted and being all of those things. But those are the things that made me able to write.
Yeah, that's
Ruby.
right. It's the same thing as if you're writing a book about electronics. You studied electronics, it makes you able to write it. It's the same kind of thing, but it's a more personal kind of thing, I guess, I suppose. But yeah, I find that really interesting that that people seem to really want to do that, right? They want to assign you a character. And with Clara, I think it's because of my legal history, and Clara became a court worker, and so, oh, that must be Michelle, right?
Yeah.
When really all I was doing with making her a court worker was getting that very critical part of that story of that time, that this agency grew out of the need of Indigenous kids that were flocking to urban centers. Okay, so we've got about 9 minutes left here. So why don't I don't see any questions in the chat or in the question function. Come on, you participants. This is a wonderful opportunity. Do you have any questions? Let's see some questions for Lisa here. Okay. So while we wait and hope for some questions here.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, whatever. Sorry?
Oh, well, if you want to go ahead, you can, but I was going to ask you a question.
Okay, we have a question.
Oh, amazing.
And then you can ask me a question.
Yeah.
So the question that we have in the chat is, does Ruby reunite with family and community? If so, what was that like?
Well, Ruby does connect with her cookum and her uncle and her auntie and different cousins and people. And, it's not perfect. And there's the good parts, and then there's the parts that are difficult as well. And it's not a panacea, and it's not the answer to everything. But I think that there's probably some poignant pieces to that where, Ruby has spent all of this time. When she had kids, she realized that those kids were going to be missing the things that she had missed her whole life. And so she did things to try and counteract that. She did what she could. So she got these pictures of Indigenous people from, like, I sort of imagine now when I think about it, those iconic pictures of Gabriel Dumont. So she'd get a picture like that and she'd put it in a frame, put it up on her wall, and she'd say, "That's your mushum," or, and so she did that with her kids to give them this extended family that she never had or never knew. And so there's a moment in there where she's actually able to take one of those pretend pictures down and put a real picture on the wall and say, "That's your mushum," and then realize that she was actually saying something for the very first time that was true about her family and her extended and her knowledge of that. So
yeah, I found that part quite moving, actually. I really liked that part. It was great. Yeah. So you had a question for me?
I was going to ask you about your cover. I was going to ask you, your cover is really terrific. Yeah, and I was going to see if do you have a story about your, like, coming up with that? Or
I didn't come up with it. It was really funny because, as you probably know, the publisher gets the final word on the cover because it's considered part of marketing and so on, right? And so they sent me this cover, and it was hideous. It's like blue and orange, and it had feathers sort of thrown all over it. It was just hideous. Let me just say that. So that was, of course, my response. No. And I said, I just would like something that is reflective of the gravitas of what's between the covers, right? And so then they sent me this one, And I literally gasped when I
Mhm.
opened it. And there's a real personal aspect of this to me. My son passed away in
Mhm.
2013 while I was in the middle of writing this book. And he passed away on the full moon, and it was the pink moon.
Wow.
And so when that cover came to me, I thought, yeah, he's here. He's on this journey with me, and he's quite likely he was standing behind that artist, instructing them from the other side.
Wow.
Um, and I love that cover. I just absolutely love it because, with the upside down characters, it feels like my characters trying to function in an upside down world, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, but the pink moon, that just, and then of course the birch, the birch is a theme that comes up
Mhm.
regularly throughout the course of the book. So yeah, so I was very moved when they came up with
Mhm.
that. It just, yeah, it
Yeah,
makes me very happy.
that is very moving, and thanks
Yeah,
for sharing that. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, it
And it
is.
is a wonderful cover. Like, it is really spectacular.
It's definitely just they knocked it out of the park. I actually intentionally asked if I could communicate with the artist because I wanted to thank them for it. And then Christy Belcourt, artist extraordinaire, is the one who created your or contributed art for your cover. Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting. So that's the American cover.
Yeah,
So yeah, Christy Belcourt. We just had this big conversation about, what are iconic Métis symbols, and what are we gonna put on the cover, and talked about sashes, and talked about Métis beadwork, and talked about, things that really, and then of course, because we were talking about Métis beadwork, Christy Belcourt's iconic beadwork art, came into the conversation. And here, I'll just grab it. And so, the publisher went and managed to get permission for the artwork.
yeah,
And so I don't even know if you can see as that clearly how
yeah.
the,
You can. Yeah,
it's the dots, the paint, so it's painted to
but
look
it's
like art beadwork.
yeah.
And she's just, yeah, she's fabulous. I can't say enough good things about Christy Belcourt. And of course, in
As
my,
an artist and an activist and a just all around amazing human.
all
Yes.
the things she does, yes. And in my other part of my life, I'm with the Gabriel Dumont Institute, and we have a huge collection of Christy Belcourt artwork that we've had for a really long time, like since the beginning, or early, probably not the beginning, but early in her career. And I know the curator of that collection says to me that we couldn't even afford to buy this now. So we're very
That
lucky to have
is
it.
true.
Yeah.
I have a few Alan Sapp paintings that I bought a long time ago, and yeah, I wouldn't be able to afford them now. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, if there was one thing you could say about what you hope the takeaway would be for readers with probably Ruby, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good question. To really relate to Ruby, I want people to, relate to her as a survivor, and to her healing, and to, the journey she goes through, just as to her humanity, right? And to be able to take that one character's journey and see it for what it is in the context of Indigenous history,
Yeah.
in this continent.
Well, and for me too. Well, I think you've accomplished that. Um, I think the other thing that you've accomplished is that there are many, many rubies, right? That it creates an example for people to think about when they're hearing news about, the apprehension of Indigenous children, the placement of children in non-Indigenous homes, and so on. So, I think you've really accomplished that quite well with this beautiful book. And I'm just so pleased that we were able to get together today and have this conversation. And I just wish you all the success And I'm going to be so crossing my fingers, even though you're not letting me be your,
Yeah.
your person at the gala. But I hope you really enjoy that, and I'll be crossing my fingers for you. It's a wonderful thing to have, and it's the only one of all of the awards that I won for this book. It's the only one that had hardware. There is
Oh.
an actual little trophy. The rest of them,
Oh.
yeah. So it'll be something to put on your bookshelf, and I'm very confident about how that's going to go. So
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking time out of, what you're doing to be able to do this with me. I really appreciate that. And I'm so glad I got to meet you.
well, and we live in the same province. We need to get together. Yeah. And it
Absolutely.
was really my honor and pleasure to be here tonight. Yeah.
Merci.
Mhm.
Thank you both to Michelle and Lisa. I'm putting a link in the chat again. If you'd like to get your hands on a copy of Lisa's book or Michelle's book or both, that's an option. If you came in at a halfway point or missed anything or just want to revisit this event, we will have a recording of the event up and on our YouTube channel, usually within 48 hours or so. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Michelle.
Good
Have
luck, Lisa. We'll talk.
Marcy.
Have a good
I hope.
night.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Merci.